Is happiness a sin? Is happiness wrong? Is it wrong for Christians to be happy,
That's
Dave?
right. That's right.
It's a great topic that you bring up today because I hear a lot of Christians assume that God wants me to be happy. In their minds,
Hmm.
that's the primary objective of God when they come to Christ, is that
Hmm.
God wants me to be happy. And I
Hmm.
thought it'd be good to really explore that today. And
Hmm.
maybe you had some thoughts to kick us off.
Well, it's interesting because even non-believers will often say, "Doesn't God want me to be happy?" And if you follow the thread of people's thinking, like the main motivation for why they do what they do, it's often because of happiness.
Hmm.
And they either think God is coming along for the ride, or if he isn't, then I'm not interested.
Yes.
There's another side to this where some people believe, and I struggled with this too, if I get happy or too happy, then that's idolatry. That's wrong. Being too happy is a dangerous thing because you can't be too comfortable. You never know, because that's in my opinion back then, idolatry. So
That's interesting. I really never thought of it from that perspective, but that's a
mhm.
great thought.
So there's kind of two angles to this I wanted to hit. The first one that I think is very important is, well, let's talk about happiness. Is the main goal in life, and this is something to check ourselves on. Is our main goal in life just to be happy? And then, of course, is it wrong to be happy? So, what do we think of the first one?
Well, I think that the main goal of the Christian life should not be happiness. And I know that sounds harsh and that
Hmm.
sounds difficult. It's not that God doesn't want us to enjoy life,
Hmm.
but his primary goal, and I've said this many times, is not for us to be happy so much as it is for us to be holy.
Hmm.
And there is a difference.
Hmm.
And I want to go to the Beatitudes to maybe highlight that difference, where Jesus, and all of us are familiar with Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit. Well, that word blessed in Greek, makarios, means happy.
Hmm.
Someone who's happy um, is poor in spirit. Well, how can that be? Because Jesus is saying, unless you come to me and you're bankrupt in your spirit with your goodness,
Hmm.
you'll never be saved.
Hmm.
But blessed are those who are bankrupt in their spirit, who
Yeah.
are poor in spirit, who don't have anything of moral character to bring to me.
Hmm.
Blessed are they, because they will be saved.
Yeah.
And he goes through the Beatitudes, and it's really an upside down thing where happy are those who are persecuted.
Yeah.
Happy are those who are in trouble and who mourn and who,
Yeah.
and so people say, well, how can that be? Because Jesus is stating right there, when you're trusting in me, you can go through all things. And because you're being transformed into his image,
Yeah.
you're happiest, you're blessed, you're most blessed when you conform to what he wants.
Hmm.
And I liked what you said at the beginning, that oftentimes non-Christians will say, well, if God doesn't want me to be happy, I'm not interested in God.
Hmm.
Well, I think the same can be true for believers.
Hmm.
Well, if God doesn't want me to be happy, what's the point in even pursuing Christ? And that's where we get confused, I think. And that's where even the Beatitudes would teach us a lesson that Jesus' kingdom is an upside down kingdom.
Hmm.
And the things we think we want for ourselves that are so fulfilling, I think Jesus would say, let's take a second look at that.
Yeah.
Because suffering and persecution are part of the plan of Christ. But we find ourselves, Dave, most blessed when we can go through those times of suffering and say, but Jesus is more precious to me than all the letdowns, all the disappointments, all the hurts, all the trials that
Yeah.
I'd ever go through.
That's right. I think it's interesting too because you hear a lot of times, one example of this is in people's marriages when they'll say, "Well, I'm just not happy." And that's the goal, right? The goal is for me to ultimately be satisfied, happy, fulfilled, and things like that. And then people just will leave for that reason. And it's like, well, the holiness is our goal. You're not always gonna, and this is with, sometimes people with children. They're like, oh, it's so hard. I'm losing sleep at night and everything else, and they're bouncing off the walls.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, the goal is to make you more holy,
Yes.
and it's sacrificial. And here, I want to put this little tidbit in. I think that happiness, although it seems like something that we want, although it seems like a good thing to make your life or to revolve your life around, the problem with it is it's so fickle. in that it is so on and off again, and your emotions are mostly dictated by circumstances. And what I think the Bible is talking about is a consistent emotion of joy and peace, even if your circumstances change and are difficult.
Yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love your illustration too, Dave, of the family,
Mm-hmm.
because God gave the family, God gave husbands and wives to be an example of the relationship he wants with us. Paul says that in Ephesians 5.
Exactly.
And so your point is a great one for all of our listeners to be reminded of, that even in marriage, even when raising children, when a husband and wife say, we want to be happy and we'll be happier when we have children. Well, that can be true,
Yeah.
but the challenge is, excuse me, challenges of raising a child can be very frustrating.
Yes.
Can be very exasperating, and it can cause a lot of different emotions that aren't happy.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, what parent wouldn't want to raise a child, to mold him or her, to shape him or her, to give him or her the love that they really need
Mm-hmm.
to be a functioning adult in our culture later on? And
Yes.
the same with a husband and wife, where we won't always be happy because we're human, and our partner's going to disappoint us, and there are going to be expectations that we have that won't be met, and all of these things are there. God's placed them there for us to work toward healing, health, forgiveness. All of those attributes come into play, and only when we exercise in those moments of friction, only when we exercise God's grace, do we find ourselves truly happy, saying, I worked at marriage. And there's a joy there, like you're saying. There's a happiness there, a contentedness there.
Mm-hmm.
When you work on a project, you're proud of it. You know, men,
Exactly.
when you complete a project, whether at work or at home, you're proud of that. If you didn't have to work at it, you wouldn't be so proud of it.
No.
But I think in marriage or raising children or in our relationship with God, reflecting back on that, we're going to be most happy when we've worked at it.
Well, you got like construction men and people like that that'll drive by and say, "I built that house." It's not just pride; it's that sense of achievement based on a hard job. I remember back when I was 16, one of the first jobs I ever did was at Delta Lake, and we took apart a playground and disassembled it and put it on a truck, and they eventually brought it back and put that playground together. Every time I see that thing, I remember getting underneath and getting the bolts and everything else and trying not to get stung by the bees that were nearby. And now my kids play on that playground. It's a really cool thing. Now, it wasn't fun in the moment, and I think a lot of people, when it comes to the happiness mindset, it's very short-sighted.
Yes.
Because you have a lot of people that'll say, I want to go and party and have fun and do everything else. Why would I waste time? I want my career and my kids and everything else. I met a lot of people who had their careers, and not that that's bad, but in the long term, they said they weren't looking at the bigger picture of, can I do something for someone else, like a family, and have those sacrificial moments? And they ended up missing out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so going back to it though, yeah, sometimes in a family, you won't always have happiness either. So it's not just guaranteed like, hey, what's the best? Because I think sometimes we advertise Christianity as like, this is the best, we often hear it, best case for human flourishing. In the sense of God's design, yes. But if you mean human flourishing by happiness and not being persecuted and things like that.
Our culture's definition of happiness.
Yeah, we got to be very careful when we use human flourishing. I hear that a lot because I think in a lot of ways, yes, if you do things based on God's design, things are going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that we have to be careful because that definition can give people the idea that it's like, oh, so this is going to make me the most happy, or I'm going to flourish in the sense of this or that. Well, no, based on God's design, not your wants and things like that.
Yes.
So we have to be very careful with how we define that. Joy, though, I think is important. And did you have any final thoughts on the happiness?
I'm gonna circle back around to the disparity between a biblical definition of happiness and a worldly definition of happiness.
Okay,
but you go ahead.
I was going to transition to is it wrong to feel
I like
joy?
that.
Okay, so I think in some cases we can go the opposite end, and this was something I struggled with because I would have these moments of happiness. So I'd be at the beach and see a cool boat and just be like, man, look at that. That's so cool out there. And I'd be, oh, don't get too happy. Don't get, because that's idolatry.
Mhm.
So I don't think that having good emotions and joy and things like that, even over things that are just creation, that can become idols. It doesn't mean that they necessarily are. Like it's wrong. You got to check yourself every time you have a moment of happiness, or you're enjoying a sports game or something like that.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, no, if you're not sinning, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
not,
Oh yeah.
going down to the local CBD shop and
You're not
yeah,
get losing your mind.
exactly. I think there's biblical support, Dave, for that, that we can enjoy things in this life because God has given them. Paul writes Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Now, this is the balance here. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor put their hope in wealth. So there's the caution, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. So there is that sense that if we're not trusting in riches to bring us hope or happiness, could I say,
Yes.
and we're just simply realizing that God's given us what we have around us for our enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with enjoying what God's given us.
Yeah.
Whether that's friendships, whether that's, a car to ride in, I don't care what it is.
A
A
nice
back
summer day.
porch to sit on, whatever it is.
Just enjoying the moment.
You're just enjoying the moment, and He's given that to us.
Yes.
That's part of His gifting.
And I think also when you consider things like heaven, I don't think God's going to surrender his creation in the new world and everything else. I think a lot of times we look at it as like, oh, sports, that's fun and all, but don't have too much fun, right? Well, don't make it an idol, but you're allowed to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So finding that balance is a healthy thing.
And that's where I think when we go through with our church family, these church-wide Bible studies, it's so helpful because we see in the New Testament what true happiness is. When your life is surrendered to Jesus, you will be happiest. So I'm going to circle back now.
Go for it. Yeah.
The Apostle Paul, nobody could ever say he was unhappy or that he was a person down and out. He, in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, though, he says this. He says, look, we are being, he says, we're hard pressed, verse 8. We're hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not always destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be revealed. But then he bumps down to verse 15. All this is for your benefit, so the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. He continues, therefore we don't lose heart, though outwardly we're wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So when our eyes are focused on the kingdom and on bringing people into the kingdom, part of our win, build, send mission statement, we find ourselves like Paul, even though we're struggling, we're wasting away, we're being beat up. We find ourselves filled with joy because we know more and more people are coming into the kingdom, even in our suffering.
And I think that's important because when we say happiness, I think a lot of times we think of, because a lot of times we separate happiness and joy. And what I think you're trying to do is say essentially the same concept, but you're saying the word happy can still kind of mean what the Bible describes as joy, if it's a biblical definition of happiness. And I think I look at one of the fruits of the Spirit, joy, is right there. And what is that? That's a gladness. That's a, cheerfulness. And I think what people have to understand is so many times in our culture, our joy, cheerfulness, all of that is determined based on the circumstances that we are in, as I mentioned earlier. Whereas with Scripture, we understand that because we have a relationship with God, and based on that relationship and the stability of that and his sovereignty and who he is, and the fact that joy comes from him, it's part of, he is the source of all these things, that no matter what I go through, I can still have joy because of him. So I think that's kind of what the Bible gets at. Paul, who's in prison,
And even Jesus again with the Beatitudes. When you read the Beatitudes, you might say, well, I want to be blessed. I want to be blessed. Well, go read how Jesus describes how those people who are blessed are.
Yeah.
They're poor in spirit. They're being crushed. They're being persecuted. They're being beat up.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we don't understand as Christians. Jesus' definition of happiness isn't based on our culture's definition, where it's all about you. And it's all about how you feel. And it's all about your circumstances, like you just described.
Absolutely.
With Christians, it's about the kingdom. Are we using even the poor circumstances in life to let Christ shape us?
Yeah.
And to point people to him by saying, look, I'm going through some hard times too. People out there living real life life isn't easy.
No.
And I think they need to hear us talk about how our lives aren't always easy either.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And yet, when we have our lives centered on Jesus, he's using even those trials to bring us a sense of his what's the word I'm looking for? His supply will meet all of our need.
I think that's important for people to hear, because when I've been in the secular workplace, there's a temptation to kind of be like, well, I'm a Christian, so everything's great. I don't have flaws. I don't get, frustrated or anything like that. Now, I don't want to sin in my frustration. I don't want to sin in my sadness. I don't want to sin in those things. But I don't want to pretend like that isn't there. Because then people might get the idea that, like, well, Christianity means everything's great because look at Dave. He's not struggling. But we have to be open about that in a way that doesn't compromise our beliefs and our duty to the Lord, while also being just not sinning at that time. And I think, it's good to be open with people so that they can realize that we're people too who are looking to someone outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not a behavior management thing.
I like that. I think that goes along with a passage I read about Paul. He wasn't looking at his circumstances. He was looking at the kingdom.
Yeah.
And Paul was happy, no matter his circumstances, when he was promoting the kingdom.
Yeah.
Really, isn't that how Christians should look at happiness?
That's right.
No matter my circumstances, if I'm promoting Christ, if I'm wanting his kingdom to move forward, then I'm going to be happiest.
Yeah, that's really good. And again, as I said earlier, Paul was often imprisoned. So circumstantially, not great.
Nope.
But joy still there.
Yeah. Happiness still there. He was clearly happy when he was writing those Corinthians.
Oh, yeah.
Saying, hey, even though I'm wasting away, even though all these things are happening, it's for your benefit.
Yep.
And I find great joy in that. And people who are praying are going to thank God for that. He was happy about that.
Yeah, he was a little frustrated with some of the stuff they were doing, but
This was his second letter. His tune had changed by the second letter.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's a good point. I see what you're saying.
But we'll see that in the New Testament study. And
yes.
I think that what we're talking about today is such an important piece, Dave. Thank you for bringing this issue into the podcast today.
But I think, and I just want to let anybody know who might feel that it's wrong to have happiness and joy. If God has given us something that's good in creation or our relationships, it's okay to enjoy that.
Absolutely.
It's not idolatry to have joy and even have a high amount of it or a peak amount of it. It's only wrong when we put that above God and idolize it and even compromise for those things.
I couldn't agree more.
So, all right, guys. Well, thank you, and we'll see you next week for the PAC podcast.